Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. It is here at the end of the year that we have a lot to celebrate. I've been feeling grateful, and I hope that you are all feeling that too. Happy holidays everyone. It's December as I'm recording this. I think this is going to come out before Christmas, and it's been a joy this year. I want to lead with that. I want to lead with joy. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to teach my audience, and that is one of them, leading with joy. You know, I know that, you know, we've all struggled, I'm sure, this year in some way, but I know that there's also a lot that I can be grateful for. I've been very grateful for y'all and for being able to see so many people come to this channel. I think we reached 20,000 subscribers this year, and that's a lot for me. That's a huge number of people for me, and I'm very thankful that so many of you are interested in this project and are able to share your passion with me. That's a true gift to read y'all's comments and to see people that are just as nerdy as I am about these things, right? That are so in depth with the lore and geography and the timeline of the Legend of Zelda series. And it's so cool to be able to share all these conversations and talk about these things that are, you know, very much getting into the minutia, but, you know, people that are paying attention. You know, I just think that that's always wonderful. You know, that's the wonderful thing about nerddom, right? It's just being able to engage in the media that you love, being able to pay attention to it. And that's really why I do this project, is because this world means a lot to me, and I want to have a reason to pay attention to it, to learn from it, to figure out really what these artists who originally made The Legend of Zelda, what they were really trying to get at, right? To learn something. I don't know, like, and I mean that. It's like it brings me closer to the source material, and I think that, like, I can talk about reasons as a fan why I want to do this. But really as a fan project, it is something it gets me closer to the source material. It gets me to respect the original creators more. And that is the driving, you know, soul behind this, is because I appreciate their work. And I want the reason to research it, right? Like that is absolutely the reason. But let's talk about what we're working on today. This is, of course, Wind Waker Unflooded, the 3D modeling fan art project where I'm reimagining the kingdom of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker. And let's talk about the Eastern Palace. So this is I've started working on this location in a previous video, but I had not quite finished it yet. So today I just kind of wanted to finish it up. And it doesn't have to be anything like too glamorous, but it's enough where you go, oh yeah, like, okay, this feels like a familiar version of a location I recognize from another game. Of course, the Eastern Palace was the first dungeon from A Link to the Past, and it was in this kind of arid region to the kind of central to eastern part of Hyrule, and there's several geographic features, right? Like I said, it's an arid region, but there's also all these rock formations. So today I wanted to focus on finishing the architecture around the palace itself and make sure that was connected to the surrounding landscape around this little mini desert in the world of the Wind Waker. If you remember from playing the end of the game, right, there's this ending desert where you find Ganon's tower. And I'm kind of deciding that that's not the Gerudo Desert. It's a little mini desert kind of in the center of the map. That's also in line with the decision kind of made by the original map, right? Like I'm basing Wind Waker Unflooded off of a piece of artwork that I've listed in the description. But this is The Lost Kingdom by MrJmZack on DeviantArt, and that has been the groundwork for kind of the geographic analysis of my project, kind of which was huge, and I want to always say that, and I want to always give credit because there's a lot of creative problem solving that he went through in making that original map that has been instrumental in the creation of my project, but it's also is like that's its own project, right? Was just figuring out like, well, okay, so you have this sea chart, you have all of these different islands in the Great Sea. How the heck do they correspond to the landscape of Hyrule? Does it even make sense? Does it even correlate? Because at a glance, if you've played the Wind Waker, you know that okay, there's a couple of things that make sense. I know that Dragon Roost Island, that could line up with Death Mountain. The Forest Haven could line up with the Kokiri Forest, and that all makes sense. You know, if we want to kind of connect that trio of Pearl Islands, then okay, Great Fish Isle, you know, that maybe corresponds in some way to, maybe it's along Zora's River, I'm not quite sure. But you can kind of start to put some pieces together. And then, of course, Hyrule Castle is underneath the Tower of the Gods. The Forsaken Fortress is maybe over the Gerudo Fortress that we saw in Ocarina of Time. Like, there's certain pieces we can put together. But then there's also so many islands, and you're like, well, I don't know how exactly this will all work, right? And which means there's a lot of mountaintops, which I think became an easier problem to solve once Breath of the Wild came out, and it allowed Hyrule to be more mountainous. And because I think that's something that, you know, in past games, you know, maybe there are only a couple of, you know, dramatic mountain, peaks across the land. You know, there was only a couple. And then Breath of the Wild came out, and there's all these mountains. And so I think that was helpful. But the map that MrJmZack made, that I based my project off of, came out before Breath of the Wild, you know? And so it's like, it's really interesting to me, and a lot of those coincidences and ways in which it lines up, I think is very interesting. And to me speaks to this idea that, like, the Zelda team, like, is more coordinated than I think the fans even give them credit for. Because the fans, like, you know, I mean, you know, we're fans, we care about these things, we notice inconsistencies, but sometimes that leads, I think, to the impression that the developers don't even care. And there's things that they are willing to compromise, and I love that. I love that, like, for the sake of creativity, they will compromise consistency. And I think that there's a time and a place where that is a fair trade, when it means to the betterment of whatever art you're making now. And like, the reality is, like, that's something that's been around the series forever. That's something that, when it comes to the lore, that I have to grapple with the Wind Waker. And maybe this is a hot take. Am I about to say a hot take? But let's talk about the Zelda timeline. And I think I mean, if we break it down, right, game by game, and there have been some videos recently talking about the Zelda timeline and how it came from and how it connects to development history, right? And so you have essentially, like, when Ocarina of Time comes out, they're aware, I think, of the adult ending and the child ending, right? And they're aware of that split. I think even as they're making Ocarina of Time, right? That's kind of essential to the ending, is that, like, Link is sent back, right? So he can kind of live out his days in a new timeline. And you're aware that there's a split. He's different now. And maybe that's interpretive. Maybe that's something where the game implies that it's cyclical. To me, I think the original Ocarina of Time game implies that there's a timeline split. But it only really acknowledges two. And so before Wind Waker came out, I think it was implied that A Link to the Past was essentially, like, or Ocarina of Time was a prequel to A Link to the Past, assuming A Link to the Past was the end result of the adult timeline, where Ganon would return again, unencumbered by a hero. Similar to the prologue of the Wind Waker. But then the Wind Waker came out and said, well, no, this is the sequel to the adult timeline ending of Ocarina of Time. And so you have these two sequels to the adult timeline ending, which is, I think, where you get the mess with the downfall timeline, which just doesn't really have a good explanation. And I grew up before Hyrule Historia came out. We were okay with a 3-split timeline, but we defended it as there was a timeline that Link left when he pulled the Master Sword. There was a timeline that he returned to live out his childhood days. And then there was a timeline that he left as an adult at the end of the game as well. So there were 3 timelines that we kind of defended that way. And it wasn't a great explanation, but to me it was also the one that still makes the most sense if you need 3 timelines. But I think it's tough. And I think that is just something where I think the Wind Waker was a game that, when it came to the timeline split, kind of, like, that made things more complicated, because then suddenly, well, how do you do your you know, how do you make these endings work? And it's just something that I think that's just, I don't know, like, I love that the Wind Waker was creative, though, and I think part of the message of the game, right, of the writing of the game was, right, and I've talked about this before on this channel, you know, I talk about this all the time, is this balance of looking back to tradition and celebrating what works and holding on to grand ideals that are worth holding on to, but then you can't let that corrupt the present. You can't let that hold you back from pursuing a greater future, right? And I think that's a simplified version of the message, but that's absolutely one of the main messages of the game. And I think that Zelda's creators are very attuned to that, and in each release are constantly trying to balance looking to the past while looking to the future. And it's not an easy balance. It's one that fans are constantly criticizing them for. And I think often they do a good job, but it's tough, right? And there's times where, as fans, we can be cruel. And sometimes games come out that we're not fond of at first, and then we come back to. I know I really struggled with Skyward Sword when it came out. It was a game that didn't particularly interest me for several reasons. There were things that held me back. But when it was re-released on the Switch, I gave it another chance, and I was really glad I did. And part of it was that, like, there were things that I loved about Breath of the Wild, but there were things it didn't do. And so I was able to kind of go back, and I felt like I was going back to things I liked about Zelda in a certain way. And I love the new direction. I love the Switch games. But I also, it's like, well, there were things that I missed. And so it was nice to play Skyward Sword and kind of go, okay, I'm getting those traditional dungeons and unique bosses again. That meant a lot to me. This linear story that was mostly well told, and that's where Skyward Sword falters, right? It has issues, and the narrative was one of the main things that held me back. I loved the intro of Skyward Sword, but upon playing the first dungeon, I was like, well, I feel like I'm running errands, right? As I actually got into the game, I felt like I was running errands, and it wasn't like totally motivated by this opening intro narrative. And I think that's something that, yeah, like that held me back a little bit. But anyway, I'm not going to ramble about that. I'm talking about a lot of different things this message. Let me talk a little bit more, just tell you what else I'm working on in the video. I'm sure you can see from the time lapse, but yeah, we're working on the Eastern Palace, finishing up the terrain there, working on the rocks that you might remember from around the Eastern Palace, from A Link to the Past, incorporating that location into the arid desert region. Here, it's not the Gerudo Desert, it's just a little mini desert north of Hyrule Castle, and we're doing the terrain around, is this, which fairy isle is it? It's one of the fairy isles. I forget its specific label, forgive me, but that's what we're working on today, just mainly doing terrain work around there and figuring out the mountainscape, and that's important too, and just, I don't know, I think I've talked before about like the terrain work and how it's like, well, I could like make a mad dash towards finishing the terrain, and that's something I could have finished a long time ago, but I was worried about doing the macro work, kind of like making large changes in the terrain before I was sure what the micro details would be. Like, I didn't want to put a mountain there and then decide later, well, actually, I want a certain village to be here, and I don't want to put this big thing in the way if I'm not sure what the little things there will be. And so there's parts of this project where the small affects the big. And I think that that's not a bad approach to a certain degree, but it's something where it's like, well, I think we're at the part of the project now where I've done a lot of the key locations where, all the villages that I want to really exist in the map are there. And so now that I know they're there, I think I can make bigger strides about being more sure about those in-between spaces. I don't have to leave room for things I haven't thought of yet. It's okay. Like, a lot of the stuff I want in the map is there. So it's okay with kind of making broader strokes again. And so I think next year we'll see a lot of the terrain progress really fill out. And we've already made great work. I think we're definitely over halfway through with the project, with the modeling of the project. And I'm definitely excited to keep making strides. And yeah, I want to finish this project before the end of next year. I thank you to everyone who's paid attention to this project, and it's been a joy to share this with people. Yeah, I mean, and thank you so much. I mean, this is definitely an end of the year video, and I definitely want to just thank my viewers and for paying attention and being attentive and sharing your passion with me. Like I said, that means so much. And reading y'all's comments and suggestions, I really invite suggestions on this project, and I'm very thankful for that. And yeah, I want y'all to know that this is something this is a collaborative project. I have a lot of collaborators and contributors, and this is something where I'm also happy to share ideas with the audience. And when y'all have suggestions in your comments, I'm happy to incorporate them, as long as they, already kind of align with my vision, right? Or, don't compromise something else that's already been added to the project. And that's just something that's like, that has to be balanced. Because it's at a specific point in the timeline that affects things. This is the world right before the flood, so that affects things. But anyway, I try to incorporate as much as I can, and I do want this to feel like it's a love letter to many versions of Hyrule that we've seen in different games across the series, right? Is that, in some ways it's a fully realized, complete version with references to all the games. In some ways it's that, but it is also specifically the world of the Wind Waker's prologue. And so that affects things, of course. And that is my driving principle through which I see all of the narrative parts of this project, because it is a narrative project. I've talked about that before. There's environmental storytelling, where I want to showcase why this world had to flood, how it fell, and how you can drive home that point through the environmental storytelling. And I want to continue to do that, right? To show issues with class, to show issues with the war and how it spread, right? Geographical reasons for that. And I want to continue to show that through the environmental storytelling. I definitely want to add outposts and battlefields, where you can see this landscape of war, and make sure that that's already part of the bones of this project, right? And so those are definitely things I want to continue to carve out. So, and comment down below any ideas y'all have for just ways to further the story through the world building, through the environmental storytelling. And I'd love to incorporate as much as I can. I'm really excited, and this is definitely a project where there's room for even more. We've done a lot, and there's room for even more, especially pure creativity, not just drawing from other games and what they have to offer, but our own additions. And I think that that's just something where I really, I've talked a lot about like creativity and what I've learned from doing this project, and what I hope y'all have taken away so far. Comment down below, if there's anything that, like, what you feel like you've taken away from watching this project, because I know so many of y'all have paid attention to the project for a year and a half now, a lot of y'all, since the project became popular last summer. And so I would love to hear from y'all what y'all take away. But I think if I can teach y'all something, I guess I want to think about like intentional creativity, right? Creative intent. And I think the beauty in adding things, right? And it's not just extrapolative. Is that a word? Extrapolative? But creativity it can be something that is very intent heavy, right? It's about, what does the artist have to say? What do they have to express? And that's really the beautiful thing about creativity, is that it's yours, is that there is a possessiveness to the art that you make. That may even be what makes it valuable to begin with, is that it's yours, right? That's what makes it worth making by you, is that it's your art, right? And I don't know, like that's definitely something that I want any artist to hold on to, is like, you have a voice and it's yours, right? And it's something where it's like, obviously, like, there's a time and a place to be aware that there's projects we make where we may have to read the room and adapt a certain way, and we may not always get to enact our specific visions all the time. There's a time and a place. But also, it's like, I think the beautiful thing about art is when it can be ours, is when we can be possessive and show that, is that you have something to say, a unique inspiration. That's a beautiful thing, a unique inspiration. I think that's a spiritual thing, inspiration is, right? And there's so much about art that I think is a mix of spirituality and the scientific method, in a way, right? You experiment, right? The scientific method, you try something, you experiment, you try something new. And I think creativity can very much be that way. But there's also something spiritual, right? There's inspiration. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that's something that we should try not to compromise on, that vision, that inspiration. That I think that's a beautiful thing. That's something that everyone has a specific, unique way of approaching that. And that's something that is, I think, one of the wonderful things about being an artist. And I don't know, I definitely want y'all to take away, I guess, just I think the importance of finding for yourself what you have to say. Because this is a fan project, right? This is something where I'm pulling from other people's art. And that is, like for Unflooded, for the Unflooded project, this is derivative. But I've still found such a joy in still expressing myself through it and finding, well, what is my unique take on this derivative project, right? That's been interesting to discover. And because there are differences, there are ways in which I have my own unique perspective in which I'm adding to the project, and ways in which every fan would do this project differently. I'd be interested in hearing if there's things that already stand out to you, if there's things that feel free to comment down below, like how you would have done the project differently, right? That doesn't have to necessarily be criticism. It can be just an acknowledgement that, hey, we have different ideas. There's different things that would have interested me that's clearly different from what interests you. And that's cool. Like, sometimes creative dissonance can be hard. That can be a tough thing to sometimes discuss, but I think it's a beautiful thing when when different people have different ideas, different things that inspire them, that's cool. And if we can celebrate those differences and learn from them, I think that makes us better artists. But anyway, I'm just rambling. Sometimes I don't know, I don't mean to lecture you all, but I hope that you've learned something from me. But anyway, I should probably wrap up the video, but thank you all for listening to me ramble all this time, and I hope that you enjoy your New Year's and your holidays, and I hope that you've enjoyed these videos. This is my gift to you, so Merry Christmas. This is my Christmas gift to you. I know last year I made like a Yule log. I don't think I'm going to do that this year. But I mean, comment down below if you really want it, and maybe I can make that happen. But before the end of the year. But you could still go back and watch that old one if you want. I think I had some of my original music in the background. And so anyway, without further ado, I'll let you go.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.